Lewis Hamilton's car was sabotaged during the Monaco Grand Prix, giving Leclerc an unfair advantage in qualifying. Don't miss the shocking penalty the FIA handed down to Ferrari at the end. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Lewis Hamilton lingered in the furthest shadows of the Monaco paddock long after the final engine had gone silent and the echo of celebration had faded into the Riviera night. His suit hung around his waist, soaked with sweat and frustration, the top half peeled off like he was trying to separate himself from what had just happened. His fingers clutched his helmet loosely, but his eyes were razor-focused, scanning the darkness with the intensity of a man who wasn't looking for answers. He already had them. The sixth place finish didn't matter. The podium didn't matter. Not even Charles Leclerc's long-anticipated victory in front of a euphoric home crowd meant anything to him in that moment. Because Hamilton had felt something that transcended lap times and tire strategy. Something that couldn't be explained away by traffic or setup or misfortune. Something had been manipulated. And he knew it. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't emotion clouding judgment. From the very first sector of the race, Hamilton had sensed that something within the Mercedes W15 was behaving unnaturally. The upgrades they had meticulously crafted for this specific circuit, the revised rear suspension geometry, the enhanced energy recovery deployment system tailored for the low-speed demands of Monte Carlo's labyrinth, had suddenly gone dull. Dead. The car was sluggish out of corners. The traction was unstable. The brake response was erratic. It was as if the vehicle was resisting him, fighting back. And Hamilton, with more than 300 races of experience stored in his instincts, knew this wasn't just bad luck. It felt orchestrated, engineered. It wasn't a misfire. It was a betrayal. He didn't wait for the post-race procedures. He ignored the broadcasters, sidestepped the flashbulbs, and bypassed the cooling fans and debrief room. The second he unbuckled from the cockpit, he moved with laser-like purpose straight to the man who held the keys to the entire Mercedes operation. Toto Wolff stood near the command center, eyes locked on the replay monitor, but when Hamilton approached, his face carved with fury and disbelief, Toto didn't look away. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. They interfered with the car, Hamilton said with absolute conviction. No guesswork. No ambiguity. Just truth. Wolff didn't ask who immediately. He understood Hamilton well enough to know that if Lewis was speaking like this, it wasn't just a feeling, it was a calculated assessment. What are you saying? Hamilton's voice was steady, but it vibrated with restrained anger. It's not the aero. It's not the chassis. The deployment configuration wasn't the one we programmed. The DRS wasn't activating consistently. I lost rear-end stability 6 laps in. This isn't an error. This is intentional. Someone changed the car after final checks. Toto's brows drew together, his jawline tense. Are you certain? I don't operate on hunches, Hamilton replied. I want every trace log. Compare FP3, quali, and race telemetry. Get me a data trail that includes every terminal access timestamp. Someone got into the system. Wolff gave a terse nod and vanished into the control room, his demeanor now mirroring Hamilton's urgency. Within the hour, a group of top engineers were pulling telemetry apart, scrutinizing data packets, configuration files, and ECU outputs. The findings were nothing short of shocking. The rear suspension settings, frozen by FIA regulations after qualifying, had been tampered with. The energy deployment curve loaded onto Hamilton's car was not the one finalized on Saturday night. It was a significantly dulled version, optimized for tire preservation, not performance. Even more disturbing was the discovery of an external override command logged less than 2 hours before the formation lap. The intrusion had come from outside the team's secure network, an unauthorized access through a remote uplink never meant to be active on race day. Hamilton's hands gripped the diagnostic report so tightly the edges began to crumple. The data was irrefutable. Sector deltas, torque lag, irregular brake migration, every detail aligned with what he'd felt behind the wheel. The manipulation wasn't random. It was specific, targeted, and more damning than anything else, it had only affected his car. George Russell's telemetry showed no abnormalities, no disruptions, no anomalies. Someone singled me out, Lewis muttered, barely loud enough to be heard. This wasn't just about sabotaging a race. It was about me. Personally. And he was right to ask, why now? Why Monaco? Why him? Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The timing couldn't have been more volatile. With his contract negotiations looming, whispers had been growing louder across the paddock. Rumors that Audi had approached him. Others that he'd met with Ferrari executives in private. Some speculated Mercedes had already begun shifting their loyalty toward Russell. Others suggested Hamilton was quietly planning an exit. But now, for the first time, it felt like the politics had bled over into the machinery. Someone somewhere had decided to send a message, and they used his car as the messenger. Across the marina, the mood couldn't have been more different. Champagne flew inside the Ferrari hospitality suite as Charles Leclerc basked in the glory of a home triumph years in the making. He smiled wide for the cameras, hugged mechanics, and hoisted the trophy under the Monégasque night sky. But Hamilton wasn't watching. He wasn't celebrating. He was flipping through encrypted access logs, comparing fuel flow data to throttle input, scanning for signatures that didn't belong. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, proof, accountability. Every lap he had turned that afternoon was now under forensic examination. Every delay in throttle response, every unexpected snap of oversteer, every subtle discrepancy was another clue. He reviewed his own onboard footage, lip-reading himself as he muttered suspicions mid-race. He wasn't just a driver now, he was an investigator, a target. And someone had underestimated how dangerous that combination could be. This wasn't over. Not even close. If someone thought Lewis Hamilton would walk away quietly, they had miscalculated catastrophically. He wasn't just fighting for a race win anymore. He was fighting for truth, for integrity, for legacy. And whoever had crossed the line into sabotage had just declared war on a man who has never lost one without burning the ground behind him. Something had shifted in Monaco. And Formula One would never be the same again. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. When the Advanced Telemetry and Cybersecurity Unit at Mercedes analyzed the post-race diagnostic logs, something deeply troubling emerged from the data. Hidden among the typical network traffic and standard system pings was a foreign digital signature, an anomalous command sequence injected into the engine control unit of Lewis Hamilton's car exactly 38 minutes prior to the formation lap. It was camouflaged as a routine data check, but the timestamps didn't lie. This wasn't internal. It hadn't come from any of the authorized nodes within Mercedes' closed-loop intranet. The digital trail led directly to a high-security FIA terminal, one buried within the core of the paddock scrutineering bunker. A terminal that, under rare circumstances, had been made accessible to certain Ferrari personnel for cross-verification and calibration purposes. This wasn't an accident. It was a calculated breach, executed with frightening precision. Toto Wolff didn't hesitate. He bypassed all formal channels and reached directly for the encrypted FIA emergency contact line reserved for crisis escalation. His voice was low, sharp, crackling with restrained fury. We've detected a critical interference event. It's targeted, malicious, and the source is your hardware. You need to see this now, before this championship is permanently compromised. Simultaneously, Lewis Hamilton was making his way through the paddock. Not to his engineers. Not to the press. Not even to his own garage. He headed straight for race control, a portable data drive clenched in his hand, veins pulsing with adrenaline and disbelief. He wasn't just angry, he was betrayed. There were certain unwritten laws in Formula One. You push the limits, you outdrive, outsmart, outthink your opponents, but you do not ever attack their machinery. And someone had just crossed that sacred line. Inside the nerve center of the FIA's operations unit, the room was dim, cold, clinically sterile. Hamilton entered without asking, plugged the drive into the central terminal, and gestured toward the screen. Scroll here, he said. Look at the logs between 1:52 and 1:54 p.m. You'll see a foreign override command transmitted to my car's ECU. This is not our architecture. This is not our encryption key. This wasn't us. The technical chief leaned in, his fingers hovering above the keyboard. This IP signature, he muttered, voice tightening. It's internal. Lewis didn't blink. Internal to you, to the FIA, or to someone with authorized access. This specific terminal? It's in a secure zone. The only external team with partial clearance? Ferrari. That's the access point your logs show. If I hadn't gotten this to you, no one would even know. They'd be celebrating a win built on sabotage. The room went still. No denials. No defensiveness. Just urgency. The moment the data was confirmed by the FIA cyber defense team, a classified probe was initiated under emergency regulatory provisions. The terminal in question was seized and disconnected from the network. Personnel with active clearance to that room were identified and isolated for immediate questioning. Interviews began before sunset. Cross-references with badge access data, surveillance footage, keystroke logs, all of it was locked under chain of custody protocols. Something sinister had taken place, and now the governing body was in full containment mode. By midnight, a confidential statement was issued to all 10 teams on the grid. An active investigation into potential electronic interference had begun. The FIA promised transparency. Forensics would take time, but no stone would be left unturned. They didn't say Ferrari. They didn't say sabotage. But the implication was obvious. Someone had manipulated hardware and software to degrade Hamilton's power unit performance in real time. And the access point had Ferrari's fingerprints on it, whether by intention, accident, or infiltration. In the paddock, panic disguised itself as gossip. Whispers evolved into theories. Some claimed it was an internal rogue agent. Others insisted it had to be the work of a disgruntled former engineer with lingering access. A few muttered the word espionage under their breath, unsure whether to laugh or worry. As the story bled through the shadows of the paddock, Charles Leclerc stood at the edge of the Monaco harbor, champagne still dripping from his fire suit. It should have been the happiest night of his career. He had finally triumphed on home soil, and the celebrations were already spilling into the early hours. Then his phone buzzed. A direct message from Lewis Hamilton. Short. Personal. No PR fluff. Just raw intention. Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc. We need to speak. Not about the media. Not about press. Just you and me. Now. Charles felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This wasn't banter. This wasn't routine. This was serious. They met in a shaded corner near Red Bull's hospitality area. No photographers. No microphones. No team reps. Just two drivers, one glowing with pride, the other burning with questions. Leclerc arrived first, eyes bright but wary. Hamilton appeared moments later, measured, intense, carrying the same energy he did when confronting adversity on track. He didn't waste a second. "I'm not trying to ruin your night," Lewis began, voice steady. "You earned your podium. You drove great. But something happened today. And I have to ask you straight, did you know anything about what happened to my power unit?" Charles blinked. What happened? There was a breach. A remote command. The FIA traced it. The origin matches a terminal Ferrari uses during scrutineering. Someone compromised my car. And it changed everything. Leclerc staggered slightly. "Lewis. I swear on everything, I had no clue. I would never agree to anything like that. I've worked my whole life for this win. I'd never take it if it wasn't earned." "I believe you," Lewis said. "But someone somewhere in red pushed a button that destroyed my chances today. And we both know what that means." Charles hesitated, face caught between anger and disbelief. "You think I didn't deserve the win?" "No," Hamilton said. "I think you were incredible. But imagine winning while someone else was handcuffed. That's not victory. That's theater. I'm not going to stay silent. I'm taking this as far as I can. Not just for me, for the sport. Because this can't become normal." Charles looked away, then back. "What happens next? If you hear anything, if you find anything out, I need to know. This doesn't end tonight. It just started." As Leclerc turned and walked off into the shimmering chaos of the Monaco night, his victory suddenly felt heavier, surrounded by uncertainty. He had crossed the line first. But now, everything around that moment was wrapped in shadows and suspicion. Back inside the FIA's mobile control center, more red flags emerged. The terminal in question had logged 2 unregistered devices earlier that week. The camera in the room had been remotely disabled for exactly 7 minutes, the same 7 minutes during which the override command had been issued. The badge ID used to gain access was traced to a temporary credential issued during testing 2 months earlier, one that should have been deactivated but had slipped through the system's filters. Someone had planned this. Not in haste. With intention. With access. With knowledge of the FIA's internal blind spots. This was no rookie stunt. It was the kind of thing only a veteran insider, or a highly resourced mole, could have orchestrated. In the Mercedes motorhome, Toto reviewed the growing file of evidence with cold resolve. Hamilton stood next to him, arms folded, watching the live system feeds, the scrolling logs, the decoded network strings. No one said it, but they all knew this was bigger than one race. Bigger than one result. It was about the soul of Formula One. Elsewhere in the paddock, rumors ran wild. Was it an inside job? Was another team involved, framing Ferrari to stir chaos? Could it be corporate espionage from an angry sponsor? Every possibility now carried weight. But Lewis Hamilton had made a decision. He wasn't backing down. Not tomorrow. Not after the investigation. Not even if the FIA tried to quietly sweep it under the rug. This wasn't just personal. It was existential. If cars could be sabotaged from a laptop, if wins could be stolen without tire contact, then no championship meant anything. And Lewis had spent his life chasing something real. Something earned. Something pure. He wasn't about to let the illusion win. The moment had barely cooled, tension still hanging in the air like the humidity before a thunderstorm, when the unmistakable sound of brisk footsteps interrupted the silence. Frederic Vasseur entered the scene, not so much walking as striding with purpose, urgency practically radiating off of him. He wasn't just reacting to protocol or following procedure. No, this was the response of someone who had heard the whispers, the not-so-quiet murmurs echoing through the paddock, picked up on the electric buzz of suspicion spreading like wildfire among teams, officials, and media. His expression was unreadable, a mask honed by years in high-stakes motorsport, but the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the faces ahead of him, betrayed the storm swirling beneath the surface. "Charles," Vasseur snapped, his voice clipped and devoid of its usual calm, "we need to talk. Now." He didn't wait. His attention had already shifted from the Monégasque driver to the man standing beside him, the man whose very presence altered the dynamics of any room, Lewis Hamilton. Vasseur's gaze was sharp, calculating, defensive without needing words. "No," Hamilton answered, standing firm like a wall, his voice measured but hard. "We're not doing this behind closed doors. No politics. No pretending. Fred, I'm going to ask you plainly. Did someone from your garage, your crew, your IT staff, anyone tied to Ferrari, gain unauthorized access to the FIA system today?" The question dropped like a hammer, and for a fleeting second, the silence became unbearable, like the intake of breath before a crash. Vasseur's eyes narrowed. His posture tensed. And then came his response, cautious and deliberate, but underpinned by a current of disbelief. "I've already spoken to our people," he said slowly, choosing every word with care. "I've reviewed the workflows. No one broke protocol. If there's been a breach, we're as eager as you are to uncover who did it." Hamilton didn't blink. He stepped forward, each word now a controlled detonation. "Then show us. Don't posture, cooperate. Turn over everything. Network access logs. Device activity. Remote triggers. Full transparency. I'm not blaming Charles. I'm pointing at whoever decided to reach into the FIA's digital infrastructure and sabotage my car during Q3. That wasn't a glitch. That was an intentional strike." Vasseur's voice dropped an octave, now laced with irritation and disbelief. "You think I'd risk everything? This team, its history, our reputation. For what? A few tenths of a second?" Hamilton's reply was ice cold. "I think someone did. Whether you authorized it or not, it happened." Leclerc stood motionless, caught between giants, visibly uncomfortable but silent. He looked at Hamilton, then at his team boss, then at the floor, as if searching for a version of reality that made sense. None of them found it. Hours later, the atmosphere in the Mercedes Technical Center was suffocating. The room, dimly lit and humming with electronics, felt less like a garage and more like a war room. Everyone present had the same expression, somewhere between disbelief and fury. Toto Wolff was at the table, eyes fixed on the main display as engineers projected data logs, heat maps, and encrypted digital trails on the screen. Hamilton leaned forward, fists pressed against the edge of the table, studying the evidence like a detective at a crime scene. "We went deeper," one of the cybersecurity leads announced. "And we found it." The room froze. There was a remote trigger, a wireless override command sent through an unsecured FIA network node. It bypassed all our local authorization layers. The command hit our ECU seconds before Lewis's final flying lap. It forced a subtle throttle inconsistency. Enough to destabilize power delivery in Sector 2 and kill top-end straight-line speed in Sector 3. The information crashed into the room like a tidal wave. A high-level cyber intrusion. Not random. Not automated. It was custom code, likely injected in real time. A sabotage operation hidden behind a veil of anonymity. But as they peeled back the layers, breadcrumbs started to appear. Encrypted fragments were broken down by pattern-matching algorithms. The style of the code, its architecture, its syntax, even its timestamps, mirrored digital signatures previously seen in Ferrari's internal testing environments. It wasn't definitive, but it was close. Very close. Toto stood up, pacing now. So someone had access to the FIA gateway, targeted our car, and used tactics aligned with Ferrari's development team? A second engineer nodded. There are matching variables. Function calls we've seen in their past debugging structures. The attack payload included modules tagged under a repository name we flagged 3 months ago during an inter-team audit. That same tag reappeared in this intrusion. Hamilton didn't react outwardly. He just exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening, gaze fixed ahead. "This isn't a rivalry anymore," he said finally. "This is infiltration." The room went silent again. One of the data security leads added, "Whoever did this knew the FIA's architecture, knew where the vulnerabilities were. This wasn't an amateur job. And it wasn't random. It was targeted. Premeditated." Hamilton looked to Toto. "If they're doing this now, what else have they done? How long has this been going on?" Wolff replied grimly, "We may be looking at the tip of a much larger operation." Legal teams were already being mobilized. Files encrypted and uploaded to secure servers. The FIA was contacted immediately, not with a complaint, but with evidence. Raw, unfiltered, time-stamped proof that the integrity of Formula One's entire competitive infrastructure may have been compromised. Somewhere else in the paddock, under the flicker of fluorescent lighting and the low hum of cooling fans, a solitary figure sat in front of a monitor. Lines of code scrolled down the screen. Logs were purged. Terminals were wiped. The person didn't panic. They moved with calm efficiency, almost as if they knew this moment would come. As dawn neared and the world slept, Formula One's most explosive scandal in decades had just taken its first breath, and it wasn't going to be quiet. Toto Wolff bolted upright, his entire frame tense with disbelief, his eyes flickering over every line of corrupted data laid out across the screens. His voice cracked through the tension like a whip, filled with fury and a sense of profound betrayal. "This is not a malfunction. It's not a technical hiccup. This is deliberate, calculated interference. This is digital trespassing, covert manipulation of race systems. They didn't simply hinder your pace, Lewis. They undermined the very framework of competitive racing. They tampered with the DNA of Formula One itself." Hamilton didn't flinch. He stood by the tall glass pane of the hospitality suite, watching the glistening city lights of Monte Carlo shimmer across the Mediterranean like a cruel illusion. His expression was unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, calm, but laced with a cold edge. "It was never just about one race. It's not just about me, is it? If they could infiltrate our systems and rewrite performance outputs with that level of precision, what's to say this isn't part of something bigger? If they succeeded once, what's to stop them from doing it again? To any of us? To all of us?" Toto said nothing. He didn't need to. The room was already suffocating with the weight of what they both understood, an unspoken agreement that something sacred had been shattered, and the damage might be irreversible. What was at stake now wasn't a podium or a championship lead. It was the soul of the sport they'd both given their lives to. As morning broke over the azure coastline, with golden light creeping across the rooftops of Monte Carlo, the FIA called an urgent press conference, summoning journalists from every major network, every corner of the motorsport world. The media room, typically buzzing with pre-race energy, was gripped instead by a paralyzing sense of dread. Reporters whispered in clusters, speculation running wild before any official word had even been spoken. When Isabelle Fournier, the FIA's authoritative and razor-sharp spokesperson, stepped up to the podium, the hush that fell over the room was immediate. Her expression was one of clinical precision, controlled, composed, but with an unmistakable tension behind her eyes. After reviewing concerns presented by Mercedes driver Sir Lewis Hamilton, she announced, her voice unwavering despite the room's heavy atmosphere, and conducting an emergency internal assessment, we have confirmed unauthorized access to the FIA's encrypted performance regulation modules during the critical hours leading up to the Monaco Grand Prix. The data integrity of car number 44 was directly compromised. A series of gasps echoed like thunderclaps across the press gallery. The revelation wasn't just shocking, it was paradigm-shifting. This wasn't a breach. It was an invasion. A digital assault on the sacred balance of fair play. The implications were catastrophic. The nature of the access indicates a highly coordinated intrusion, Fournier continued. Advanced intrusion techniques were used to subtly manipulate energy deployment curves, brake pressure modulation, and tire management algorithms, significantly impacting on-track performance in ways nearly impossible to detect in real-time telemetry. Every journalist in the room scrambled to document her words, not out of routine, but because they sensed history unfolding. The FIA, an organization not easily rattled, had just admitted that its most secure systems had been infiltrated, and the fallout was just beginning. The source of the breach remains unknown. All non-essential system connections have been disabled until further notice. A third-party forensic cybersecurity team has been deployed. We will not speculate on potential culprits, but rest assured, we will pursue this investigation to its ultimate conclusion. Integrity is not optional, it is foundational. While the FIA tried to regain control, the Formula One paddock unraveled. The mood had shifted. Gone was the casual banter between rival engineers. Gone was the familiar tension of qualifying simulations. What remained was suspicion, unease, and the palpable sense that something had changed forever. No one was speaking openly, but no one could stop thinking, who did it? Ferrari issued no formal reaction, radio silence, strategic or fearful. Red Bull's statement danced around specifics, offering measured support for a thorough and impartial inquiry. But McLaren's Zak Brown didn't mince words. In front of a stunned group of reporters, he declared, if these allegations are substantiated, this marks the darkest chapter in the recent history of Formula One. It's no longer about which team crossed the line first. It's about whether the line even exists anymore. We stand by any driver whose performance was sabotaged by hidden hands. Back inside the Mercedes camp, Hamilton stood alone once more, watching mechanics move through the garage with robotic solemnity. But he wasn't seeing them. He was watching a sport he loved twist into something unfamiliar, something infected by secrecy, by corruption, by unseen forces that could tilt the outcome of a race from a laptop. He wasn't thinking about constructors' points. He wasn't thinking about legacy or statistics. He was thinking about how many times he'd raced on pure instinct, on trust, believing the fight was fair, only to find out someone had rewritten the rules behind a screen. Monaco hadn't been a defeat. It had been a message. And that message was clear: someone somewhere wanted him to lose, not by being outdriven, but by being digitally disarmed. Later that evening, after the media frenzy had settled into stunned silence, Lewis and Toto sat in near darkness inside the mobile HQ. A low hum filled the space, the ambient hum of fans and cooling systems the only background noise. Their conversation was quiet, but the words were heavier than any post-race debrief. Toto leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes blazing. We're not just dealing with a competitive advantage. We're confronting a systemic failure. And if we let this slide, if we walk away, it sets a precedent that manipulation is just another strategy. That deception can be part of the game. Lewis turned slowly, his expression unreadable, but his eyes carried the weight of something older than anger. Then we don't back down, he said. We go wherever this trail leads. Whether it's a rogue coder, a corrupt official, or something deeper. We burn the whole thing down if we have to. Because if we don't, if we stay silent, we become complicit. Toto's nod was slow, deliberate. There was no longer any illusion of politics or protocol. This was no longer about damage control. This was about exposing truth, no matter how buried or uncomfortable it might be. And at that moment, Lewis Hamilton wasn't just the face of a scandal. He wasn't just a driver wronged. He became something else, an unwilling symbol of a sport at war with itself. A man no longer driven by trophies, but by principle, by the need to restore trust to a game that had lost its compass. His fury wasn't explosive. It was controlled, focused, weaponized. The quiet rage of a champion betrayed not by a rival on track, but by shadows behind the scenes. And that rage, cold and sharp as steel, would not be ignored. From this moment forward, every press conference, every race start, every team radio would carry an undertone of reckoning. This was no longer about Monaco. This was about survival, about whether Formula One could still claim to be a sport rooted in competition, or whether it had become a puppet show pulled by invisible strings. Hamilton was no longer racing just for wins. He was racing for redemption, for accountability, for the soul of every single person who ever believed Formula One was pure. And now, the fight was only beginning.